Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
The United States has released 4 Afghan prisoners from Guantánamo Bay. The 4 men will all return to Afghanistan, where they'll apparently be able to live without restriction. Earlier this month, 6 other Guantánamo prisoners were sent to Uruguay 4 years after they were first approved for release. Their transfer was the largest for a single group of Guantánamo prisoners since 2009. Meanwhile, the Obama administration's envoy for the effort to close Guantánamo Bay has resigned. Clifford Sloan, a Washington lawyer. He headed the State Department's Office of Guantánamo Closure for 18 months. Speaking to CNN on Sunday, President Obama said he will do everything he can to close Guantánamo.
I'm going to be doing everything I can to close it. It is something that continues to inspire jihadists and extremists around the world, the fact that these folks are being held. It is contrary to our values, and it is wildly expensive. We need to close that facility, and I'm going to do everything I can.
Right, you want them here in a...
With the latest release, there are 132 prisoners left at Guantánamo. To talk more about the significance of this, we're now joined by Pardis Cabriai, senior staff attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Welcome to Democracy Now! So there have been this series of 2 groups who have been released from Guantánamo. Talk about their significance.
Right. So all of these men were held for over a decade, for 12, 13 years without charge. They were all approved for release by the Obama administration in 2009. The 4 men who went to Afghanistan had spent half of their imprisonment at Guantánamo waiting for release. The significance, I think, is, in terms of Uruguay in particular, it's the first Latin American country, the first country in South America to come forward and offer safe haven to men who need it in order to leave Guantánamo. President Mujica has really emphasized the fact that he's doing this as a humanitarian gesture. He himself obviously was a political prisoner for 14 years, was in isolation. So I think his expressions of support, the fact that Uruguay has come forward and taken 6 men, he released a letter from the State Department stating that the United States did not have information that these men were involved in conducting or facilitating terrorist activities. So I think this, for the region, is important, and I think we hope that there's more of an opening for more countries in South America and in the region to come forward and take the additional men who remain. There are 64 men of the 132 still at Guantánamo who have been approved for release, most of whom since 2009. So it is absolutely past time for these men to go home. We are now approaching the 13th year anniversary of Guantánamo. January 11th will be the beginning of the 14th year that these men have been in prison. So it is past time to close it.
Well, in an interview, outgoing Uruguayan President José Mujica said he agreed to receive the 6 prisoners out of his long-standing opposition to Guantánamo Bay.
Eso no es una cárcel, es un nido de secuestro.
That isn't a prison, it's a kidnapping den. Because a prison entails subjection to some system of law, the presence of some sort of prosecutor, the decision of some judge, whomever that may be, and a minimal point of reference from a judicial point of view. Guantánamo has nothing.
That was outgoing Uruguayan President Mujica. But earlier this month, Abdul Hadi described his new life. He's one of the folks released there in Uruguay.
Uruguay is a beautiful country. The Spanish class here is good, and I study 2 hours every day. I can speak a little Spanish, and I know how to say Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
And part of this whole issue of Sloan resigning, could you talk about that and the speculation that he was very unhappy with the pace of the releases, especially with the responses of the Defense Department to releasing the men in Guantánamo?
Sure. And just on that point of the video you just showed, I mean, I think it is very important to note that the American public never has direct exposure to the men themselves. And I think that if we were to have that kind of exposure, they are citizens of most rest of the world that interact with former detainees, who can go to panel discussions and hear them talk about their imprisonment, who can have that exposure firsthand. We never get that here in the United States, and I think that really that's one of the reasons why I think these myths about who we have held and the fear-mongering that continues to happen is allowed to continue. So that's just, it's important to note. As far as Sloan, I don't know that we really have much insight into why he resigned. I think the point is that the administration needs to fill that position immediately. He's played a critical role. That position has a critical role. It's the special envoy, the person tasked with negotiating transfers. He was appointed by President Obama after the hunger strike, if you remember, in 2013, after a couple of years where that office had been closed. Since Sloan had been in his position, there have been nearly 24 transfers. So the pace of transfers has been what should be happening, what we expect to continue to be happening, and the administration absolutely needs to fill that position immediately.
I want to turn to comments that President Obama made about Guantanamo while speaking to Candy Crowley on her last show on CNN over the weekend.
There are a little less than 150 individuals left in this facility. We are going to continue to place those who've been cleared for release or transfer to host countries that are willing to take them. There's going to be a certain irreducible number that are going to be really hard cases because we know they've done something wrong and they are still dangerous, but it's difficult to mount the evidence in a traditional Article III court. And so we're going to have to wrestle with that. But we need to close that facility, and I'm going to do everything I can.
So President Obama, one of his first acts in office as president, way back in 2009, was to close Guantanamo. Congress opposed it. What can he do? I mean, he's done a lot on other issues right now, on the issue of immigration, for example. What can he do on Guantanamo?
He can continue this pace of transfers until all of the men, not just those who are cleared right now, but all of the men the administration does not intend to charge are released. He has the authority under Congress right now. There are countries coming forward to resettle men. There are a number of men. It's important to be clear that this is now largely a prison for Yemeni detainees. Over 80 of the 132 who are still there are from Yemen. Some of those men want to go home. They should be able to go home. The administration has said that it's going to review cases, individual cases, case by case. It should be looking at the specific circumstances of each of those people and determining whether some of them can go home. Some of them, frankly, want to go to third countries, and they should be resettled, and there are now countries coming forward to do that.
What can be done about that specific Yemeni situation where obviously the government in Yemen, and given the continuing strife there, is hardly in a position to say, well, we're going to take all these guys back?
Well, I mean, I think there is a certain number. Of the 64 who've been cleared, 55 are Yemeni. These are men the administration has determined do not pose the kind of threat that would require them to continue to be detained at Guantanamo. There is also this myth that all of the people at Guantanamo were ever engaging in terrorism to begin with. So the idea that there's a risk of returning to the battlefield is false. So we need to be clear about that. There are administration officials themselves who said a former commander of Guantanamo said easily a third of the men there should not have been there, were mistakes. They later changed that to half of the men. So there is a history and facts that we need to be clear about in terms of who we have held there.
And finally, parties, it's quite amazing. In the last few weeks, these historic developments, the U.S. and Cuba normalizing relations. For the U.S. to have this piece of land, rent it from Cuba, you would think, since the U.S. has imposed this embargo for more than 50 years, what they'd want to do with that piece of land is show Cuba what they believe, what the U.S. government believes democracy should look like, should be conducted like. Instead, they have this prison there where they've tortured and held men. Many of them have been cleared for more than a decade.
Absolutely. And in the context of discussion right now about accountability for torture, I think it's also important to note and be clear that when the U.S. releases people and sends them home, there is never a moment of acknowledgement of wrongdoing for having held them for 12, 13 years without charge and having tortured them. And we know that torture has happened, not just in CIA black sites, but in military prisons like Guantanamo.
Should the U.S. give Guantanamo back to this whole area, Guantanamo Bay, to Cuba?
I think it should, but the first step would be closing the prison and closing it the right way, not whittling the number of prisoners down to some palatable number for the U.S. public and transferring them to prisons in the United States.
Pardis Cabri, I want to thank you for being with us, Senior Staff Attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights.